June 12, 1962, Alcatraz. A guard makes the morning count, stops at a sleeping man and calls his name. Nothing. He reaches through the bars, and the man's head rolls off the pillow. It isn't a man. It's soap, paint, and human hair. The cell is empty. 3 cells are empty. And 60 years later, no one knows if the men who left them are dead or still out there. They called it the Rock, a fortress on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. 1.5 miles of black, freezing water in every direction. Between 1934 and 1963, Alcatraz held the men no other prison could keep. Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, the names that frightened a country. The currents were merciless. The water was cold enough to stop a heart. The whole purpose of the island was a single promise, that no one leaves. Men had tested it. In 1937, 2 vanished into the bay and were never accounted for. In 1958, another drowned trying. In nearly 30 years, no one had ever gotten off the Rock and lived to prove it. That was the reputation. That was the promise. And for 6 quiet months, 3 men had been taking that promise apart. 1 spoonful of concrete at a time. The mind behind it was Frank Morris, orphaned young, passed between foster homes, and in and out of institutions since he was a boy. And by the prison's own measure, brilliant, with an IQ reported at 133. Morris arrived on Alcatraz in 1960. Down the row were 2 brothers from Georgia, John and Clarence Anglin. Bank robbers who'd been breaking into things together since they were children. And in the cell aside Morris, a 4th man, Alan West. They knew one another from older prisons and older sentences. Placed in adjoining cells, they began to plan. Not a violent break, something patient, something the guards would never see. They would let Alcatraz believe they were still there, night after night, while they quietly carved a way out of it. Their tools were almost a joke. Spoons from the mess hall, and a drill built from a broken vacuum cleaner. At the back of each cell sat a small ventilation grill. With the sharpened spoons and the makeshift drill, they widened the openings in the aging concrete, a little more each night. In the evenings, Morris played the accordion, and the music covered the sound of the scraping. When a hole grew too large to hide, they built false grills from cardboard and magazine paper, painted to match, and slid them into place before every morning count. Behind the wall ran a forgotten utility corridor, and above it, an unused space near the roof. That became their workshop. There, out of sight, they built life vests and a raft, stitched from more than 50 stolen raincoats, the seams sealed with heat. And they built 4 faces, heads of soap and paint, finished with real human hair swept up from the prison barbershop floor. On the night of June 11th, they laid those faces on their pillows, pulled the blankets up to the chin, and left. 3 of them made it out. Alan West did not. The cement around his vent had set too hard, and by the time he tore the hole open, the others were already gone. He climbed back into bed. Morris and the Anglins crawled into the corridor, climbed a maze of pipes to the top of the cell block, and forced their way up through a ventilator onto the roof. One of them slipped, and the noise rang out across the island. But the guards who heard it decided it was nothing. They slid 50 feet down a pipe, cut through the perimeter fences, and worked their way down to a dark strip of shore the searchlights couldn't reach. They inflated the raft. They climbed in. They pushed out into the black water. And the rock went quiet and held their secret through the night. The next morning, the Count broke the illusion in seconds. A head rolled. An alarm went up. Alcatraz locked down, and one of the largest manhunts in the country's history began. The bay gave back fragments. A paddle. Pieces of the raincoat raft near Angel Island, the very place they had been aiming for. And a small plastic bag wrapped inside another, holding a mail order receipt, photographs, and the written addresses of the escapees' families. The things you carry if you mean to start a new life. But that was all. No bodies surfaced. And on the mainland, the next step of the plan, steal clothes, steal a car, left no trace behind. In a case this famous, watched this closely, not one matching theft was ever reported. 2 explanations, and the evidence refuses to choose between them. The first explanation is the official one. In 1979, after 17 years, the FBI closed the case, concluding that Morris and the Anglin brothers had almost certainly drowned, pulled under by the cold and the current before they ever reached land, their bodies carried out through the Golden Gate and lost to the sea. It is the simplest answer, and most experts still believe it. But it has never been proven. No bodies were ever found. The second explanation is harder to bury. Investigators have shown more than once that the crossing was survivable. Teams have rebuilt the raft, ridden the same tide, and reached the shore. Over the decades came the sightings, a farm in Florida, a face in a crowd, a boat under the bridge the morning after, and quiet stories from the Anglin family, of anonymous flowers arriving for years, of contact that supposedly continued long after 1962. None of it could ever be confirmed. And then, in 2018, the world learned about a letter. It had arrived at a San Francisco police station years before, in 2013, and been examined in silence ever since. It opened with 4 words: "My name is John Anglin." The writer claimed all 3 men had survived the bay, that they all made it that night, but barely, and that he was the last one living, sick with cancer, willing to turn himself in for medical care. The FBI ran the letter for fingerprints, for DNA, for handwriting. The results came back inconclusive. Not a confirmation, not a hoax they could prove. Just limbo. The U.S. Marshals dismissed it and left the file exactly where it had sat for half a century. Open. A document that seems to answer the question and refuses to answer it in the very same breath. Today, more than 1 million people a year ride the ferry out to the rock. They line up outside one preserved cell to look at the hole in the wall and at a copy of a face made of soap and human hair still resting on the bunk where it was left. And now Alcatraz is back in the headlines as officials talk of reopening it. But the island's oldest question has never been answered. 3 men climbed into a raft made of raincoats, pushed out into the dark, and became either a quiet tragedy or the only men who ever beat the rock. The case is still open, so is the question. What do you believe happened out on the water that night? Tell us below. And stay curious.